Brown babies. Hello, hello, hello. Listen, I'm on the couch today, and what I am attempting to accomplish is talk with those individuals who are present and accounted for as same-gender loving folk in our community. I have really seen some really challenged young people as they try to figure out what role they play and where they, or what options that they may have as being out. And so I have made an effort to go to some of those folk who are truly accomplished in terms of being out and being responsible. And we're going to hear a little bit about their journeys so that we know that all things are possible despite who it is that society might tell you in terms of stigmatizing you or, again, condemning you for who you are. I am really glad to have my boss, who was my boss, my post-boss, a wonderful man who I've just always admired, Gary Daffin, who is the executive director of the Multicultural AIDS Coalition. And Gary has been at the helm of the AIDS Coalition for
14 years.
14 years.
Almost 15, I think.
And Gary is done. He put me to work. I mean, for over 10 years, but for 3 years, last 3 years ago, I was asked to just wake up and do what you do, Greg, hit the streets and meet black men. What better job could you get to go out and just meet black men and bring them through the door to encourage them to get themselves tested for HIV and AIDS? Gary, let's hear you first share a little bit about that. Something you out of the womb, or did you go through that heterosexual confusion, or?
Out of the womb, well, yeah, I think everybody's gay or out of the womb. People were gay. No, I think I first realized I was gay when I was probably about 6 years old. And for whatever reason, it never really bothered me. I never really ascribed to all of the first, I didn't know what it was. I knew I was different. I think a lot of people have that experience. They know that they're somehow different. As you get older and realize what it is, I grew up in the South, so I knew better than to, these early 70s. But for myself, I never really had an issue with being gay. I never really tried to not be gay. It was just a matter of how to navigate, at the time, living my life the way I wanted to.
And so navigating your life is no easy feat for a lot of folk, or navigating their lives.
Right.
Give us some clues on how you were able to navigate your life in terms of getting around being condemned.
It's a lot different now than it was 40 years ago when I was, growing up, a 10-year-old. I just never bought into the whole condemnation concept.
Okay.
I never thought there was anything wrong with me. And I always just think about the fact that my mother used to tell us that people weren't going to like you because you were black. And some people are not going to like you because you have light skin, like she did. My father was dark, my mother's lighter. And she said, don't worry about that. It's not your issue, it's their issue. And so for me, it was very easy to translate that to being gay. It was like, this is who I am, this is the way I was meant to be. I'm not going to change. I always knew there was no way of changing who I was. It's who I was. So I realized that it was other people's challenge, not mine.
So your parents were accepting, or you were just right away they knew that you were?
No.
Let's hear it.
So my parents, I don't think I told my parents I was gay. My father knew I was gay, and I think I learned later that I think he used to tell my mother that I was gay, and she would defend me, quote unquote, because I don't think my mother was crazy about the idea. Now my parents are fine. My family in general, the first person I told was my older brother when I was in high school. And remember, this was back in the 70s, I think. So, and we've always been really good friends, best friends. And he was like, okay, well, that's all right. And I think that was the moment that every gay person should have, when there's that one person in the family that you tell that you decide to divulge who you are to, and they say, okay, that's cool. If that could happen, I think we would have a lot less trauma for people. Because the family, particularly for black people, the way that we have learned to deal with racism is by having a family and friends who share that experience to talk to it about or to experience it with. So when that group of people that are your frontline defense for the world, when they aren't supportive, it's really shattering to people. And I think that's where the first bit of trauma happens to particularly black folks. So I've always thought that if people could have just that one person in their family that they're really close to that could help them, at the very beginning, they would be much better off.
That's to have that experience
Right.
is truly kind of unique, because even in my family, I notice that when I attempt to get with my nephews, my nieces, what am I doing? Which a parent should do, but I kind of suspect that it has a lot to do with them or me being out, and that it might rub off on them and they see it in some positive way. Gary, let me do this with you. The big issue we have in our community, HIV/AIDS, and you are head of one of the premier agencies or the gatekeeper agencies in the black community, the Multicultural AIDS Con, what black men's numbers are looking like, and some of the challenges that you think may be affecting them in terms of getting into care.
Well, I think when you look at what's happening with black gay men around the country, it's pretty devastating and it's sad. And I think it does stem back to people's sense of self-worth and their ability to be who they are in society. Unfortunately, we've made a lot of progress in preventing HIV. We still have about 50,000 new infections each year in the country. The sad thing that we've seen happen is that gay men are still getting infected, and black gay men, particularly young black gay men, are the only group that we've seen an increase in a rapid increase in new infections over the past few years. And there's a number of reasons that's happening, but I think the main reason is that people don't have access to care, aren't getting tested, they're having other sexually transmitted diseases, which makes HIV much easier to get. And people aren't able to talk about who they are, they aren't able to live their lives out and talk to their friends and their parents, but also their doctor about their sexuality and what their prevention needs are. So when you have a group of people who aren't accessing care and who aren't getting the attention that they need, what we see is that there's a lot higher prevalence of HIV among men of color, gay men of color. And so since people tend to have sex with people that are of the same race, that means that the risk is simply higher. It's not that people are doing anything riskier, they aren't having more unprotected sex, they aren't using more drugs, they aren't having more partners. It's quite the opposite. Studies show that black men are trying to protect themselves, but the simple fact that you have an environment where there's just more HIV and more people who don't know that they have HIV. Right. Most, in fact, they tend to protect themselves and protect their partners.
So let me go with this concept of what they call bisexual men. And do you have any thoughts about how that plays out in the HIV world with black gay men? Am I asking a clear question here?
Well, I think there's a lot of different narratives that happen in the community because we don't want to face the fact or simply acknowledge the fact that there are black gay people, there are black bisexual people. And somehow we will come up with any possible story to explain why the epidemic is different in our community, other than the simple. I like to talk about that in general. Men are having sex with men. We don't like to talk about that at all. And there are men who have sex with men and women. Now, if you look at most of the data that we've seen, the studies have shown that men who have sex with men are getting HIV from other men. Women, of course, are mostly getting HIV heterosexually from men, and it's not necessarily bisexual men. Men who are injection drug users are another big population that has been
infected by HIV, heterosexual men, or you said not necessarily? I didn't quite hear that.
No, the vast majority of HIV transmission among women, their risk is heterosexual sex.
Okay.
We're talking like 75 to 85%, depending on what part of the country you're in. So they're getting HIV from having sex with men. And those men are getting HIV primarily from injection drug use, or some from having sex with men, some from having sex with women. And it depends on where you are. If you look in Massachusetts, when you look at black people who've become infected each year, the majority, actually over half, are people who are born outside the United States. And so we have to look at the epidemic in different places to see what's actually going on. And so women here are getting HIV heterosexually. And there are some men who are as well, but still, among men, the large majority are people who are getting HIV from having sex with other men.
So let me hear a little bit more about that. I mean, I've always thought the transition...
Well, I think that, let's remember the epidemic is different in the United States and Western countries than it is in sub-Saharan Africa. The vast majority are heterosexual people who've been infected heterosexually.
Okay.
But in the United States, the vast majority are men who have sex with men. And that's the same in other Western countries as well. So when we talk about HIV, let's be clear whether we're talking about the domestic epidemic, which here in the United States, or we're talking about the epidemic somewhere else. So HIV doesn't care whether you're black, white, blue, purple, gay, straight, bisexual, polyamorous, whatever. So most people in Africa, for example, are becoming infected heterosexually. There are gay men in Africa also who are becoming infected as well. But HIV doesn't really matter. The question is, where does it take hold in a particular society? A lot to reduce the number of people who get infected from dirty needles.
Well, I like what you're doing here in terms of making it clear that although, we are, in our domestic situation is what it is, bigger picture, that there's a global thing going on. And so it happens in different kind of ways. I wanted to focus on us being black gay men and the stigma that comes with being HIV positive.